Hello there. Welcome to Forum Focus. I'm Wyatt Sharp. It's good to have you with us. Premier Doug Ford has framed this provincial election campaign here in Ontario as a critical move to strengthen his hand against U.S. tariff threats, a narrative that has stirred both support and skepticism across the province, with the Progressive Conservatives riding high in the polls and the opposition leaders still warming up. Critics argue that this move is less about tariffs and more about capitalizing on favorable odds to secure power. Is this truly a maneuver to protect Ontario's economic interests or a calculated gamble to exploit political momentum? This election, called well ahead of the mandatory schedule amidst contentious issues that the opposition leaders are still bringing up, like healthcare and the cost of living, prompts us to question the urgency and the underlying political games at play. Joining us to break down the complexities of this election is Ahmed El-Baimi, author of Polly Corner. Ahmad, good to have you with us. Thanks so much for making time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Um, let's just start out. Do you think Doug Ford is feeling any regret for calling this election, given the 30-day pause on some of the tariffs that was unveiled? It seems as if now it's a little bit more difficult for him to make the tariffs kind of the sole focus of the campaign. You saw even him kind of readjusting his slogan from Protect Ontario to Protect the Wallets of Ontarians.
I don't think the premier has any regret for calling this early campaign. Look, he's up in the polls right now, close to 40% amongst most pollsters,
Mhm.
with the Liberals behind and the NDP. The premier will say that this is about the next 4 years, that he needs stability facing facing President Trump's administration. And look, we saw that with the tariffs. The prime minister, got President Trump to reverse the tariffs that were set to be imposed on all Canadian products. And then just a few days later, the president decided to impose 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum across the board. And so this is really playing into what the premier's messaging and what the premier's framing for this campaign has been, that there will be instability over the next 4 years and that they need a provincial government that is stable. There is no election within the next 4 years so that they can, see it through from the start to the end of this administration.
And what about some of the other party leaders? I mean, they have been kind of desperate to change the narrative on this election. You saw Bonnie Crombie, in particular, her opening kind of campaign launch for this election was on healthcare. You had a lot of people clipping it, posting it on social media. I had an NDP strategist that I was talking to recently who was, talking about the fact that her hat was flying away, that they redid a press conference just the other day because it didn't go, as well. Are they gaining any momentum, specifically on issues like healthcare and education? Again, as I said, given that Doug Ford seems to be taking the mantle on tariffs at this point.
Look, I would say that for the Liberals in particular, this has not been a good campaign. It has been a campaign of, uh, uh, some missteps here and there. That they are gaining momentum at the expense or as a result of the NDP's collapse in polling, which we can talk about. But look, the Liberals' campaign has been focused on healthcare. They have been trying to really move away from the narrative that this is anything to do with tariffs. We saw this in the Super Bowl ad that they ran,
Mhm.
very much about healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. And when they did talk about tariffs, it wasn't about their plans to deal with President Trump's tariffs. It was more about Doug Ford said that he was happy to support Donald Trump in the last campaign against Kamala Harris. Uh, the Liberals have struggled. I would say they've struggled for a few reasons. First of all, um, they are they're still a small party. They don't have the resources that a larger
Yeah.
party like the Conservatives or the NDP would expect. And we've seen those things play out. The bus that they have that said that they had around 10,000 people in Ontario died waiting for a surgery. That number was not true. It was plastered on the bus that Bonnie Crombie rides around the province on. And things like these, small missteps like these, that
Yeah.
really, really eat away at the NDP, at the Liberals' momentum.
And so let's focus on the Liberals. We only have about 20 seconds here, but is it because they're still kind of reeling from the effects of the Wynne McGuinty era of Liberal Party politics in the province? Or is it just simply that their message is not resonating with Ontarians in the same way it is for some of the other parties?
I think part of it is apathy, political
Mhm.
apathy. People are not really interested or engaged right now. Some people are tuned out. A lot of people are making the connection with the federal party, and there is a lot of
Yeah.
the anti-Trudeau sentiment, and that could be playing a role here provincially. But look, Doug Ford is a popular leader right now in Ontario. There's a lot of liberal voters who are planning to vote conservative, many of whom I've spoken to, and I think that's part of it, that the party's not resonating, the messaging is not resonating, and Doug Ford right now is just he's Teflon. He beats whatever comes at him, and he stays high in the polls.
All right, we will leave it there. Ahmed El-Baimi, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back. Welcome back. I want to continue the conversation with David Clement, news director here at the News Forum, and Dimitro Basmat, former spokesman for Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party. Hello to the both of you. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
David, let me just start out with you because obviously this is really unique as to what's happening in this election. It was called for a specific reason, and then it seems as if the reasoning in large part has shifted. You saw Doug Ford actually change his campaign slogan from Protect Ontario to Protect the Wallets of Ontarians, to change kind of the messaging of the election from tariffs to fiscal responsibility and fiscal management. Is that perhaps a sign of regret for calling this election in the first place?
I'm not sure if it's necessarily a sign of regret and more of a shift given the unnature of the tariff debate. It was a huge risk for Ford to call the election early. It really hinged on the tariff debate continuing or the tariffs coming through, right? The idea that he would be kind of Captain Canada and lead the province through some murky waters. I think the pause creates a little bit of that dynamic shift, but there's still aluminum tariffs, and then that deadline just a few weeks away keeps the campaign for him still about the issue of tariffs. I mean, he's just recently in DC speaking to the Chamber of Commerce, and so I think he's still holding the narrative campaign-wise.
And Dimitri, the Liberals obviously are having a pretty rocky start. I was talking to one guest earlier who was talking about the number that they put on their bus. I think it was 30 million or so, talking about it was a healthcare related number. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was interesting because they completely misquoted the number and put the wrong number on the campaign bus, and just little mistakes like that that are adding up to bigger and bigger mistakes over the course of this election.
Right.
Is that because they're still reeling from the effects of, again, kind of the Dalton McGuinty, Kathleen Wynne era, or is it just a sign perhaps that their messaging is not resonating with Ontarians?
Well, I think they're really on the back foot in this election. They didn't have all their nominated candidates in place when they first got started. And it was, for a third party status party, they didn't really have any funding from the government to support the work. And that's where it kind of slipped through the cracks. And I think that, Doug Ford strategically chose to do an early election because of the fact that he was on the front foot. And we can really see that, as the campaign keeps going, it's going to shift to that. And Doug Ford still has very clearly the early advantage on this.
And is Bonnie Crombie perhaps not doing enough, or did she not do enough in order to actually get ready for the campaign itself? Because Bonnie Crombie was very popular when she was the mayor of Mississauga. She had decent approval ratings going into this election, and just for whatever reason, her messaging is not resonating with people.
Well, I think I'll push back on that because I do think that she is. It seems like she's becoming the clear alternative to Doug Ford right now. And, people didn't really have super high expectations for Bonnie Crombie because she is leader of the third party. Merritt Stiles, who's leader of the official opposition, is really down in the polls right now. And if there's an election today, she would likely come in third. So we could see that there is momentum gaining from Bonnie Crombie and the Liberals. And she's really becoming the clear alternative in this race. So I don't think that there's the narrative that she is on the back completely at the back is really a clear one right now.
And David, what is the next 4 years, assuming the polls are right and Doug Ford does get reelected, what do the next 4 years ultimately come down to, aside from dealing with the tariffs? What issues will kind of be front and center?
I think it's going to be legacy building for Doug Ford, because most politicians at that point, after being in power that long, expire regardless of their previous popularity. I mean, we've seen this with Justin Trudeau. So I think it will primarily be on legacy building. I think there will be a lot of talk about energy. They'll probably lean in on nuclear energy and continue some of the progress that the province has tried to make so far. And then there may be some other issues that he further hammers home that are kind of like meat and potatoes issues, probably see additional policy changes on alcohol retail or maybe the way in which the LCBO operates. but basically, how does he leave the province after another term? And what does he have to say for himself as kind of the legacy he's built, which after what would be a very long tenure as premier?
And just quickly, about 20 seconds or so, what has he done over the course of the past few terms that he's had that is making Ontarians so proud, it seems, to support him based off of some of these polling numbers? I mean, the opposition parties are touting all of these things about healthcare, education, that would make you think the past number of years have been, a disaster, but Ontarians don't seem to be buying that.
Vibes. And I don't mean that as a joke. I literally mean he has a unique characteristic of folksy vibes that plays well, especially with working class Ontarians who may traditionally vote for the NDP.
Yeah.
And that's where I think a lot of success comes from.
All right, we will leave it there. We are going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more with Dimitro and David. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are joined once again by David Clement, our news director here at the News Forum, and Dimitro Basmat, former spokesman for Justin Trudeau. Dimitro, I'll come to you because we're talking about all of the issues that are important in this election campaign. I'm curious, though, because it seems as if what the mainstream media often talks about in election campaigns can be driven by kind of a drama-based politics almost, political slogans, political rhetoric. Some of the parties are, it seems, trying to make somewhat of an effort to make it about the substance policy-based discussions that are actually impacting Ontarians on kind of a day-to-day basis. How do we get it to be so that the election is focused more so on that latter half as opposed to the drama-based politics?
Well, I just think the reality is this election is going to be focused on purely tariffs. And I mean, there's no doubt that Doug Ford has differentiated himself as Captain Canada. And I think it's with the real threat you have at the southern border, it's really tough not to focus on that. And that's why Doug Ford has really, protect Canada. And that's his slogan. And we have seen a bit of a shift in rhetoric from that because the tariffs are now delayed. And perhaps it was bad timing on Doug Ford to call an election without, with the unpredictability of Donald Trump. But we see the opposition party is trying to really capitalize on healthcare, which has consistently been the main polling issue that Ontarians really care about. But we're just not seeing the parties make enough ingrounds on that issue.
So, David, let me ask you about the tariffs then, because if Dimitro's right, and if the polls are suggesting that tariffs are a very important issue right now to Ontarians, provincially, Doug Ford's likely to get reelected again as far as the polls are concerned, but federally, they're also suggesting that Pierre Poilievre is likely to get elected. How might someone like Doug Ford, in office for 4 more years, Pierre Poilievre, not only work together, but also work with Donald Trump?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. You would assume that there could be some synergies between the two parties. I think meeting politicians in Canada and a Trump administration,
right,
with the tariff threat, I think most of that has eroded. And so it's really complicated. You could forecast a scenario where Pierre Poilievre is prime minister and Donald Trump is president, and you have almost like a Mulrooney-Reagan style relationship. I'm not equating either of Poilievre to Mulrooney or Trump to Reagan, but you could see that kind of cordial relationship emerging. If the tariff threat is there, you just won't have it. And Pierre Poilievre has been, despite the criticism, has been rather forceful in terms of Canada is not going to be the 51st state. Here is my plan. Here is how we're going to beef up Arctic security and other major issues that are largely involve some of the grievances the Trump administration has had. And so it would be a strained relationship unless we can get over the hurdle of not having the tariff debate come up. And of course, we have the USMCA up for renegotiation as well, which is something that a Poilievre government would have to renegotiate with Trump.
And Dimitro, it seems as if right now, to go back to kind of the politics of it, the NDP is trying to say they're the only ones who can defeat Doug Ford. The Liberals are saying they're the only ones who can defeat Doug Ford. Again, it's all about political messaging, it seems, right now. Is there any way that Bonnie Crombie can all of a sudden take over the realms of official opposition or, in some cases, maybe even jump to the premier's chair in the legislature?
Well, frankly, I think it's unlikely halfway through the election that she will become premier. I think Doug Ford is pretty set course on winning a majority government again, and the polls will show you that. The other problem that Bonnie Crombie faces, though, is that the popular vote only counts for nothing. Because if she has less seats than the NDP, who has a very concentrated support in certain ridings, she will once again be a third-party status. And the question becomes whether she can get 12 seats to become official party status or not. And I think her political future really lies in that.
And David, how much of this is a provincial Liberal issue versus just a tarnished kind of reputation of Liberals, not only across the country, but around the world, given we've seen the election of Donald Trump and other kind of right-wing leaders around the world?
Yeah, I think there is some weight carried by Bonnie Crombie in terms of people, rightly or wrongly, associating the provincial Liberal brand with the federal Liberal brand they may be tired of. Going to be very difficult for her to overcome that, especially with such a short time frame. The opposite of that is Susan Holt, who won the premiership there, running really without any attachment to the federal Liberal Party.
Yeah.
A little more difficult for Bonnie Crombie to do so, given the fact that she was a federal Liberal. She's been known to be friends and colleagues and associates with all of the folks in Ottawa whom Ontarians may not appreciate as much anymore.
All right, we will leave it there. David Clement, Dimitro Basmat, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we are going to take a quick break. When we return, I'll speak to Larissa Whaler, who served as a spokesperson to Doug Ford in the Premier's office and during the election. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Joining me now is Larissa Whaler, former communications director to Premier Doug Ford, and she joins us to talk about the communication strategy, not just of the Ford campaign, but of the election in general. Larissa, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Mike.
So let's just start it. Obviously, Doug Ford has been kind of going around the airwaves on various new U.S. networks in recent days, but it's gotten a lot of Ontario media networks talking, asking, why, from your perspective, is the Premier doing interviews during a provincial election campaign with U.S. media?
I think it's a few things on this, Wyatt. One, the Premier is available almost every day to Ontario media at his media avails, where media can come and ask any questions they want, and he answers them. I think the idea of talking to U.S. media about the possible, we're in a tariff and a trade war now, is that Americans need to know what's happening. One of our biggest challenges with turning the tide on what Trump is doing is that Americans don't know. And when Americans are told what's happening, they don't like it. And we're fighting a very, very, very busy American news cycle. And so the Premier and truly all the premiers and even the federal government are trying very, very hard to put this in front of Americans so that Americans themselves can tell trade representatives, hey, guys, we don't want to hurt Canada.
And from your perspective, is the relationship between Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau in a decent point for kind of this negotiations that, are going to be coming up over the course of the next few weeks to move forward? You're hearing a lot of people saying the whole reason Doug Ford has to do the interviews with U.S. media networks is because Justin Trudeau is refusing to do so.
Oh, so I hadn't ever heard that Justin Trudeau has refused any U.S. network. I would be shocked to hear if he didn't want to put himself on television. But truly, I think the Premier and the Prime Minister have a very cordial relationship. I wouldn't go so far as to say, they're best friends, but Doug Ford has at every turn gotten along with whoever he has to get along with for the benefit of Ontarians. He has a genuinely more warm relationship with Chrystia Freeland. He has a genuinely very warm relationship with Dom LeBlanc. So I don't think that we're struggling for connections between Ontario and the federal government.
And do you think Doug Ford and his media strategy is moving the needle at all in this election? And I guess that could potentially speak to a broader question. Americans and Canadians, for that matter, are not necessarily paying as much attention to media in the way they were even just a few years ago. Does that mean that perhaps some of the campaigns are looking to reevaluate their approaches?
I mean, campaign media has changed insofar as long as I've been around. When I started on campaigns, we had a media bus that used to follow the leaders, and we'd have 2 or 3 events a day. We'd have one media avail, we'd have some photo ops, And there was a lot of coverage, right? Right now, that's not happening. You're finding reporters are tuning in because the technology allows reporters to tune in from a remote location. You find they're doing that more and more. It's more cost effective, and they can cover, one reporter can cover way more news, right?
Mm.
Is this better? Is this worse? It's probably worse, but this is the reality we live in right now. You've also seen a lot more paid advertising on social media going direct to the voters, right? And you've seen the Ontario government even not just putting Doug Ford on American airwaves, they've taken out paid advertising, both online and on television, to speak to Americans themselves directly.
And just lastly here, before we conclude, we have about 30 seconds. Moving forward, obviously, right now the polls are suggesting that Doug Ford is going to carry this election very strongly. And so does that perhaps signal that maybe media input is not as much value to Ontarians currently as it was, even as I said, just a few short years ago?
That's a debate for the ages. Is how much do campaigns matter? How much does communication during a campaign matter? This, by and large, is not a change election. This election is about who do you want to go toe to toe with Donald Trump. That is what's happening in the world. That is what the ballot question is going to be. If this was a change election, I think media coverage would honestly matter a lot more. Right now, you can see Doug Ford is pretty playing it safe, right? He has his daily media avails, but
Mhm.
he's not going out of his way to
Yeah.
try to garner attention like Bonnie Crombie and Mart Stiles are doing.
Yeah, and just to point out to our viewers, neither is Pierre Poilievre, and his polling is at record highs. So maybe that does, signal something in this debate. We will leave it there. Larissa Whaler, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Wyatt.
And that's a wrap for this edition of Forum Focus. Thank you for joining the conversation. If you enjoyed today's discussion, be sure to follow us for more insights, analysis, and thought-provoking dialogue. Stay engaged, stay informed, and we'll see you next time right here on Forum Focus.